Hi everyone. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Just wait for people to come in from the waiting room. See, people are just still coming in, so I'll just give it a couple more minutes. Okay, I think I'll get started and then people can join us as they arrive. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amelia and I am the manager of the Snowdon Trust Disabled Leaders Network. So I'm really pleased to be hosting today's session. Just to give you a quick visual description, I am a white woman with blonde hair and I'm wearing a olive coloured top with a burgundy jacket and I'm sitting in front of a bookcase. And we're really pleased to welcome you today for today's session on advocating for change. So for those of you who are not aware, the Disabled Leaders Network is a network of emerging leaders, basically, in all different fields, students, early career professionals, and we're a community and we really try to bring about change. So today's session is going to focus on how to do that. But just before we get started, I wanted to go over a few access and general housekeeping concerns. So Sophie, can I hand over to you just to describe the access situation?
Yeah, hi everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Sophie. I'll be doing kind of the behind the scenes stuff today. I've also put all this information in the chat if useful, so feel free to look there. But in terms of BSL, if you're using BSL, so it should be that everyone can see the BSL interpreter. If not, please let me know. We also recommend if you need BSL to join from a laptop, it makes it much clearer, and often phones, because they're small screen, or tablets won't show the interpreter signing, even if we spotlight them for you. We've also set up this meeting to be in gallery mode. Again, this should help the interpreter be clearer. But if you'd rather change it to speaker, there should be options to do that on your screen. There should be a view button. Again, I've put a link in the chat that will give you guidance on how to change your view if you prefer. In terms of captions, you should see a button on the bottom of your screen. If you see me looking away, it's because I have my laptop to check your view. But there'll be a small kind of rectangular box at the bottom of your screen that says CC in it, and it says show captions underneath. If you press that, the caption should turn on. Alternatively, there is a link to a more transcript kind of view in the chat, which you are welcome to use. I believe that's it for me in terms of kind of the accessibility. Just that, again, in the chat, I've put my email. You're welcome to contact me if there's any issues, but it might be easier just to put in the chat box any issues you're experiencing. So yes, please let me know, and I hope you have a great session.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And as Sophie says, please do message in the chat if you have any concerns or tech issues during the call. Otherwise, please do. So this is a webinar style session. So if you're in the audience, you don't need to worry. We can't see or hear you, so you can relax and enjoy. But we would very much like to still hear your thoughts and opinions and your questions. So please do use the Q&A box, which is at the bottom, should be at the bottom of your screen, and it says Q&A, to submit questions and comments. And we will then, when it comes to that section of the session, we will make sure to ask your questions and respond. So please do. We do want to hear your thoughts today. And so, yes, I think we can kind of get going, really. So today's session is all about advocating for change and how, as a group of young disabled people primarily in the audience today, I'm sure, how we can kind of bring about that change and how to balance the kind of activism with taking care of ourselves, making sure that we're not taking on too much of the burden ourselves, but really how we can bring about change, because I know that's something that so many of us are passionate about. And we're going to be hearing from Cara Elizabeth Yar Khan, who will be talking from a more global perspective, as well as Natalie Podder and Lucy Neat Ward, who will be sharing the kind of local perspective and how to really influence change at university and how to bring about that institutional change. So I will stop wittering on, and I'm really delighted to introduce Cara Elizabeth Yarkhan, who will be our headline speaker today. I'm sure many of you are really familiar with Cara's work, but she is an incredible global disability rights advocate. She's worked with the United Nations, with the White House, amongst many others, and is a really wonderful champion of disabled voices. So yes, we'll hand over to you, Cara.
Thank you, Amelia. Bonjour, buenos dias, sabach al khair, zao shang hao, buongiorno, bon dia. Good morning, friends, from New York City, right in front of the Empire State Building in Manhattan, which Indigenous people originally called Mannahatta. This is Cara speaking. I am a biracial South Asian woman. I have olive toned skin and green eyes. I have black hair that's tied up in a very tight ponytail with a long braid hanging down from the top, a little bit like the genie from an old television program. You all might be too young to remember that one. I love Genie. I'm 48 years old. I was born in India and raised in Canada, hence the strange accent that people cannot always place. I have an Indian Muslim father, a British, from Surrey, British Anglican Christian mother, and a Chinese Buddhist stepmom. Our main language at home is English, but it's spattered with words in Urdu and Mandarin Chinese. We celebrate Eid, we celebrate Christmas, at least the presents part of it, and we celebrate Chinese New Year. All of these different cultures and religions and the 11 countries that I've lived in, they have molded me and they have created the lens through which I see the world and very much through which the world sees me. My story today is going to be one that maybe seems a bit strange or at least different. And what I hope that you take away from it is that there is no one size fits all way of advocating. All activists and advocates don't look the same. And as you know, when it comes to our lived experiences, really focusing on our lived experience and the value that that can bring to a conversation or an organization is really all that we should be worrying about. Now, at the age of 48, I can admit humbly that I was not this wise or this calm at a young age. I knew from a very young age, actually, while I was in primary school, that when I grew up, I wanted to work for the United Nations. I genuinely believed that I could activate change. I genuinely believed that I could help poor children. When I was very young, actually, about the age of 6 years old, which was grade 1 in Canada, there was a telethon on television. This was the early 1980s. I was born in 1976. It was about 1982. And it was one of these really sad, pathetic telethons where they rip your heart open by showing devastating, unethical pictures of children starving. But as a little 6-year-old who knew enough about fear and pain herself at that very young age, I had this huge empathetic heart and could feel the pain that I perceived from the images that I saw on the telly. And so I turned to my mom and I said, I probably wanted to get out of eating my Brussels sprouts that she probably boiled and I did not like at the time. I said, can we send some of our dinner over to these kids? As a sweet child might want to do is just share and solve the problem. And she kindly explained to me that wasn't necessarily the way that change came about. And that in this particular case, we had to donate money, probably something about $12 at the time, which to a 6-year-old is an absolute fortune. I didn't have $12. So I took a box and I cut a hole in it like a shoebox. And we went around my apartment complex collecting coins as I explained to my neighbors that there were starving children in Africa and we had to do something to save them. The conviction and the passion was just piercing through my veins. I felt that we had to do something and that everybody around me had a responsibility to be involved. I raised my $12 and I sponsored my first child, as was the trend in those days. That was the start of my activism. The next day, in Mrs. Lumen's grade 1 class, I professed to my teacher and to all the children there that we had to help these poor children, that at the time that was about Africa, it was on the continent, African children who were starving, who needed food, who needed our help. Mrs. Lumen called home asking my mother, why is Cara talking about starving children in Africa? And luckily, my mother didn't stifle me. She didn't say no or stop talking about that. And so I began to start looking at these issues and finding ways to be involved since grade 1. And then when I was 12 years old, which is grade 7 in Canada, I learned what the United Nations was in social studies class. Canada has a very unique social justice education system. We learn a lot about social justice around the world and in Canada. And so when I learned that the United Nations was this global organization made up of member states that was there to solve the world's problems and to eliminate poverty, everything just became so clear. When I grew up, I was going to work for the United Nations. And I told everybody, whether they wanted to hear it or not, my parents, my teachers, my friends, every yearbook, I would make a proclamation about joining the United Nations. And I had a much older family relative who was in the UN who didn't pay me much attention. So I asked, what are the things that would make me a qualified candidate to apply to work for the United Nations? And the guidance that I was given was learn multiple languages, volunteer work to show that you had a variety of interests and you were contributing to the community, and an international experience. Throughout high school, I studied and found which college or university had the best international development program. Now, I don't know about you when you're in school, but when I was in school, we had counselors, school counselors, who used to guide us into a career path based on which subjects we were best on. I was a math nerd. I love numbers. 1 + 1 always equals 2. I love the structure and I love the clarity of that. So very much I was pushed towards finance or architecture. But because my heart was in social issues, I was determined to study international development, even though these weren't my strongest marks. There was one university at the time in Canada, there are more now, but at that time, it's called the University of Guelph, and it's about 2 hours outside of Toronto. It's the only college that I applied to, actually, which in retrospect was a bit stupid. I did the same with my master's degree, but luckily both times worked out. And so in college and university, which was a Bachelor of Arts in International Development and a major in politics, I did a 4-year degree. I actually ended up extending it to a 5th year. One, because I am a nerd and I love an intellectual challenge and I love to be involved. So I extended 1 year because my 4th year, I studied in Ecuador. I got that international experience. And I went to Ecuador speaking English as my mother tongue and speaking French, having studied that in school in Canada, which in English-speaking Canada is mandatory up to grade 5, and then you have a choice. I did it all the way through high school. I admit that I loved saying or speaking French out loud because I have an excellent accent. It was a little bit of a show off. I admit that. I was very good at performing, and I'll tell you a bit about that afterwards because we do perform in so many ways and it can be quite dangerous. But when I went to Ecuador, I lived with a family in an academic exchange program, a family that didn't speak English. Now, at the time, it felt quite painful, but in retrospect, it was brilliant that the mother of the family, she was a school principal. So she was very strict, Señora Judith. She would make me ask for breakfast in English, or pardon me, in Spanish. So I'd take out my book and I'd learn the words, and then I'd rush down to the kitchen. I say, por favor, quiero un pan, which was, I would like a toast, please. And if I got it wrong, she'd send me back up to my room and I'd study again. So there was a lot of tough love, but I've had a lot of tough love from women. And I think that's very much made me the woman who now gives tough love, but it's very much molded me. So when I finished college, I had taken some master's courses again in international relations. I was like, I've studied 5 years, I'm brilliant, I've learned the languages, I've volunteered everywhere, whether it was raising money for the Canadian Cancer Society or climbing up the CN Tower, the Canadian National Tower, which at the time was one of the tallest freestanding structures in the world, and walked up all these stairs to raise money for I don't know what at this time. But I'd done what was asked of me: languages, community service, international experience. So of course I'm going to get a job with the United Nations, right? I've studied for 5 years. I got the degree. I did what I was supposed to do. Not exactly. I didn't get a job right out of college, and I actually had to go back to waitressing, which I was mortified about, but I had to pay the bills. My dad and my stepmom had actually moved to China, to Shanghai, so that was our family base, and my mother had passed away when I was 17. So I was pretty much on my own, other than my great friends. And so I was sleeping in the pantry kitchen on a mattress on the floor of my best friend Jill's house. And in those days, I didn't have a computer or a laptop, couldn't afford one. So I used to go to a local convenience store, and you would pay by the minute or half an hour, whatever it was, to access a computer in the back of like a sweet shop. And I would apply to international internships. The very first internship I applied to was the United Nations Association of Canada. So this is a UN internship. It was 8 months long, and it was specifically geared towards undergraduates, so people who only had their first degree. And I don't even know if these exist anymore, but this is quite a while ago. I applied to that internship, and honestly, it was the only job I wanted, because I had this idea, wow, the United Nations. And I admit, there again, it was part of the performance. It was part of the prestige. It was part of the brand recognition. And in retrospect, this can be quite dangerous. It worked out well for me, but it's really important to understand that those big bureaucracies, those international organizations, might not necessarily lead you to the actual kind of work that you wanted to do. But I was stubborn, and I was persistent, and I wanted to work for the United Nations. I spent the whole summer waitressing, feeling really bad about waitressing, when I should have been really proud of myself for earning a living and paying my bills and supporting myself. There's dignity in all types of work. And I applied to 54 internships. Anything that was related to international development, anything that was abroad. I was so desperate to leave Canada. I was so desperate to go to the field. Really, at that time in my life, the only stark poverty that I had seen was returning to India as a teenager to visit family. And again, that just drove my passion to wanting to make a change. It drove my passion of wanting to speak out about the injustice that I was seeing. I felt so awkward being in these lavish homes of my family. And then beside on the streets, you would see these large construction tubes and children living inside of them, eating out of garbage dumps. So it very much drove that passion. One day, I was going to work. I came out of the subway in Toronto, and I was looking up at the CN Tower, probably remembering how much my legs hurt at the time, climbing that, raising money. I think it was the World Wildlife Fund. And I had a phone message. Miss Kara Yarkhan, this is a call from the United Nations Association of Canada. You have been offered a job with the United Nations World Food Program. Tears, bubbling mess, ugly cry, like the Kim Kardashian, ugly cry. And I was just so delighted. My dream had come true. First thing I did, called my dad. I'm a daddy's girl. My father is a wonderful guiding force in my life, who's never told me no, who never had the gender divide between my brother and I. He always believed that girls were just as strong and just as smart and should be competitive and financially independent. And if you wanted to get married and have children afterwards, or some traditional gender role, that was up to me. But the most important thing was education. And he was proud. He was proud. And I think that also got me off the hook a bit of not going and doing my master's right away. And if he had had it his way, I also would have done a PhD. But that wasn't the route for me. I went to Ecuador, and that was my first job with the United Nations World Food Program. I was actually hired as a program officer. And so I was making $500 a month. I didn't care how much money I made. I got to work. I saw the UN flag. I might have cried again. Took my business card. I felt so proud, sent it to my dad. And I was actually sent out to visit villages in rural areas of Ecuador. So I was going back to Ecuador. Remember, I'd done an academic exchange there. Oh, funny aside, I'd actually applied to work in Thailand because that's where my parents were living in Shanghai. And so it was going to be closer to them. And I was interviewed for Costa Rica and Guatemala because of my Spanish skills. And then they offered me Ecuador. And cheeky me writes back to them and says, I don't want to go to Ecuador. I've already been there. And then I'm thinking to myself, Cara, don't be so stupid. It's a job with the UN. It actually served me well because I already had a network. I already knew the culture. I already had traveled the entire country during my academic exchange because I was so curious to learn and dive deep into the culture. So then going and working for the United Nations, I was hired, as mentioned, to do this programming to go to survey food insecurity of rural families. One day, I overheard a conversation that we couldn't send an international delegation to Peru. And so I realized that, oh, well, I just made a phone call to a friend who had a travel agency. And I said, hey, do you want to sponsor this? And we can put your logo on a flyer or something. He was all for it. I went and told the country director that I got flights and hotel and you could send the whole delegation out. She said, how did you do that? I said, I don't know. I just asked. Obviously, it wasn't as simple as that. I'd been fundraising since I was a little kid with Trick or Treat for UNICEF. And then all that fundraising and volunteer work I'd done throughout primary school and middle school and high school and then in college. So I've actually been a professional fundraiser my entire career. It was a fluke, complete fluke. And now I work on a $100 million impact fund with GDI Hub. Talk about full circle. So with this, I want to tell you that the path that you outline for yourself isn't necessarily the one that you're going to take. And while at some points in your career that might feel uncomfortable, it's okay. I went on to Ecuador, from Ecuador to Panama. You know, in my spare time, I used to dance. I love Latin dancing, salsa, merengue, bachata, and cumbia. Actually, in college, I used to teach salsa dancing. Again, part of it performance, showing off that I could do spins and flips and all of this stuff. Let me tell you where that performance bit comes from. In my childhood, my mother suffered from alcoholism, and it was a disease that just completely consumed her, and she took her own life when I was 17. I very much blame myself for my mother's death. I blamed myself for not being able to take care of her. Also, that's a big family secret. When you live with an alcoholic, you don't tell people what's going on. Nobody knew. I didn't bring friends home. Friends didn't know. I didn't tell my teachers. So it was quite a shock for my school principal when they found out. I carried a lot of trauma throughout my younger years, and it also forced me to perform because I was used to making things seem like everything was okay. I carried a lot of sadness. I carried a lot of struggle. And then at the age of 30, I had been limping for a few years. And at the age of 30, I was diagnosed with a very rare type of muscular dystrophy. I am one of about 2,000 people in the world with a genetic condition called hereditary inclusion body myopathy. Today, 21 years after my diagnosis, I'm quadriplegic and onset tetraplegic, which is severe incapacity of your legs, arms, and your torso, and I use a power wheelchair. I never imagined that part of my journey. But in that career, I actually quit my job when I was being diagnosed and moved home to my parents, not part of the plan. And then when I was offered to work with UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund in Angola, who would have thought limping around I would go to a country that was just coming out of 27 years of civil war? It was rough, but I was determined. I was so upset when people decided what I could and could not do. That little fiery 6-year-old full of passion who believed that she could make a change, she was still in me, and I think she's louder than ever today. I didn't want people making decisions for me. Now, I agree there was a part of the performance and I ignored my disability. I ignored my progressive chronic illness, and I ignored the pain. I suffered a lot. It took me about 10 years to embrace the severity of my condition. And it was only after going from Panama, when I left China, I went to Angola, Then I went back to China with UNICEF to Beijing. Then I went to Madagascar. I jumped out of work for 10 months to do my master's in Italy. Then I buzzed back to UNICEF in Thailand, went on to Mozambique, and then Haiti. I spent 2 years in Haiti after the devastating earthquake, now wobbling around on 2-leg braces and canes, and I was scared. I was scared of being judged. It was only then, after 5 years with UNICEF, that I was able to disclose my disability because I was afraid of losing my job. But it worked in my favor. I was appointed as a disability focal point, although that was terrifying because I'd never heard of the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I didn't know about disability programming or rights in general. I was a fundraiser. I was the $1 million princess with UNICEF. But what a great way to learn. It also changed the way I saw myself. I worked with the Secretary of State of Haiti, who is also a person with a severe physical impairment. I was guided by Rosa Angela Berman-Bieler, who is a quadriplegic woman herself, who also was one of the authors of the CRPD. And then I met Judy Heumann, the mother of the disability rights movement, a famous American activist who we sadly lost 2 years ago. As my disease was progressing and I saw many of Judy's symptoms or attributes in myself, I thought, wow, I'm so proud of Judy. I could be proud of myself. The point is community. Being in community with people with disabilities, whether they were colleagues or friends, or the children and mothers and fathers in Haiti who UNICEF was trying to help, made me feel enormous pride. I don't necessarily feel proud because I have HIBM. I feel proud because of this incredible community that we are all a part of. Now, I've done big things. I came to the United States after 2 years in Haiti, spokesperson for children with disabilities. I made a movie that's executive produced by Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton. You can watch it for free on YouTube. It's called Facing the Falls. I became a White House political appointee thanks to Judy Heumann opening a door for me. I spoke at the G7 at the first Ministerial of Disability Inclusion in Italy last October, and I just moderated the Global Disability Summit in Berlin. And you're like, wow, it's a lot of spotlight. But I can tell you there are a few things I want to say in these last couple of minutes that I would really hope that you can take away. Advocating for change doesn't need to be big, and it doesn't need to be in the spotlight. It's hard being in the spotlight. And if you look at my life on social media, say, wow, it's so glamorous. People don't see the nights of excruciating pain in bed, needing to be propped up and taking painkillers because I have to go on stage the next day. It doesn't reflect the devastating indignities that I have to face when I'm traveling and people treat me like I'm less than, or they're rude to me, or they completely ignore me and don't even acknowledge my presence. And it doesn't reflect the emotional roller coaster that I find myself on in trying to balance that very fine line of honoring my personal experience of living with this devastating condition and being a public advocate trying to promote the social and human rights model of disability. So a couple of things to take away. One, struggle can be good. It can help build our tenacity and our perseverance. But your barometer you might want to use in your struggle is suffering. If you're suffering, please try and think, have the courage or the ingenuity to ask for help. It took me a long time to be really comfortable for asking help. Now I ask strangers for help on the streets in New York. I'm like, excuse me, I can't raise my arms above my head. Can you help me put my hat on? Sometimes I think they think there's social media cameras hiding somewhere and they're going to get $500. I don't care. Point is, I need my hat on, gotta look cute, and I gotta go. So that's one, the balance between struggle and suffering. Two, being stoic is not the same thing of being strong. And there is enormous strength in being vulnerable. And finally, remember that your advocacy and your change doesn't need to be big. It can be quiet. It can be small. And that is just as powerful as doing something big and being in the spotlight. The final thing I'll say is that courage is a really nasty word in our community, right? People give us credit for being brave just for getting out of bed. Although I do think sometimes getting into my clothes by myself is an Everest feat. But there is value in being courageous. and trying to push through fear. But remember, being fearless is not necessarily a good idea. So we want to try and find a balance of being courageous as well as being fearful, because it can lead you to extraordinary places. And with that, I will leave you. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Cara. It's incredible to be able to learn from you and to hear all about your experiences. And yeah, I think it's a very important message for us about that balance. And no doubt we will have many questions coming in that we can ask you towards the end of the session. So for now, I would like to hand over to Natalie, if that's okay with you, Natalie. Natalie Podder is a member of our Disabled Leaders Network, and she's going to be talking to us about her experiences of advocating for change, particularly utilising student unions at universities. So I will hand over to you, Natalie.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Natalie, and I am a biracial woman with dark brown eyes. I have lavender-ish hair with my dark brown roots growing out, and I'm wearing a black jumper. And today I'm going to be talking about advocating for change in higher education. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, we can see them.
Okay, perfect. So I was the Deputy President of Welfare at Imperial College Union from 2021 to 2023, and I'm going to be talking about my journey to advocacy. And my journey involved my own experiences as a disabled student, and so I'm going to be talking a little bit about what it was like navigating university in that respect. Quick content warning for trauma and eating disorders, although I will not be discussing any of it in detail. In my first year of university, I arrived in the UK from the US, and I started having these inexplicable symptoms, brain fog and muscle fatigue and weakness, and a deterioration in my mental health. I really struggled cognitively for the first time in my life. And this came to a head in my second year of university, where my mental health became significantly worse and I had to take an interruption of study. I got some reasonable adjustments and some support for my mental health, just the bare minimum of 25% extra time on exams and being able to take an exam in a separate room. This did, at least initially, help me to finish my second year of university, although I could feel that my brain fog and my ability to concentrate and remember things was getting significantly worse. In my third year of university, I experienced some significant trauma, and years later, when I did my research on sexual misconduct at university, I discovered that disabled students are 5 times more likely than their non-disabled peers to experience sexual violence at university, and I unfortunately became a part of the statistic. And as a result of this, my mental health severely declined and I had to take more time out of university. Although I wasn't really able to get quite to the root of my issues, I was given another adjustment, given an emerging eating disorder for being able to take food and drink into exams. In my second attempt at my third year, my physical health and my mental health deteriorated again, and I was given some more refined diagnoses and treatment for my mental health, but physically I still felt really weak and really sick. And it wasn't until COVID, in my third and final attempt of completing my third year of my BSc, that I got my miracle diagnosis of Hashimoto's disease, which is an autoimmune disease that attacks your thyroid, and you need to supplement it with thyroid medication for the rest of your life. But a few months after I started treatment, I finally started to feel like myself for the first time since starting university. I saw my grades improve dramatically alongside a lot more support than I had gotten previously with COVID. So we had remote learning, which was much more accessible. I was able to finish my degree overseas while in Houston getting treatment. I had access to lecture recordings that were of high quality, slides and notes, excuse me, given in advance, automatic coursework extensions, and I was able to speak to a study mentor who had experience working with students with chronic illness. And so this all had a huge impact. I saw a significant improvement in my grades, and I was much happier overall. And as a result of these experiences, I felt inspired to advocate for change for students with disabilities and mental health conditions at university, which is why I ran for and I got elected as a student officer at Imperial College Union. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what a student union is and how it works. So what many people may not know is that student unions are actually completely separate, independent bodies from the university, and they are charities in their own right. It is mandatory, as per the Education Act of 1996, for each university to fund the existence of a student union. And these student unions are, being charities in their own right, are regulated by the Charity Commission and partly by the Office for Students as well. And they achieve a public benefit through a number of charitable objects. And these charitable objects look slightly different from student union to student union. I've put the ones for Imperial College Union here, but to some degree, they address educational interests, the welfare of students, being the representative channel from students to their home university, and providing some form of personal, social, recreational development for their students as well. And here I'm going to be talking about the representation structure of student unions. On the bottom, you see 9 small icons, and these represent low-level student representatives, students who are studying full-time, but take some time to collect feedback from their peers. And there are brackets leading up to 3 larger icons. These represent the higher level student reps, who represent larger cohorts of students. Oftentimes, these can be departments or faculties or campuses if you are at a university with multiple campuses. And these higher level student reps have icons, arrows pointing to 3 icons with megaphones in front of them, and these represent the student officers. Student officers are remunerated, and they take at least 1 full year out of their studies to embody this representation function full time. And in between these 3 icons representing student officers, we see a conference table, which represents the Board of Trustees. And this is representing the other main responsibility that student union officers have. Apart from representing the voice of students, they are also responsible for the running of their running and governance of their charity. And another important thing to note with the representation structure here is that oftentimes you also have what are known as liberation officers as part of the structure. And liberation officers exist to represent the needs of marginalized communities at universities. So these can include students with disabilities, mental health officers. At Imperial College Union, we had working class officer as well. And these also form an important part of our representation structures at student unions. And now I'm going to be talking a little bit more about what it was like for me in advocating for change and what the main lessons were that I learned in doing so. So essentially, there were 2 main things that I managed to do during my 2 years of being a student union officer at Imperial College Union. In my first year, I focused on changing policies on sexual violence. So I reviewed the disciplinary procedures at Imperial, and I also managed to implement a new condition of registration at the Office for Students on addressing harassment and sexual misconduct. And in my second year, I focused on the impact of cost of living on vulnerable groups. I did some research on which groups were being disproportionately impacted by the cost of living crisis, and I identified these to be disabled students, international students, students with caring responsibilities, and students from a financially disadvantaged background. And I managed to get quite a bit of funding, both from my home university and from the Office for Students as well on this front. And there were 5 main lessons that I learned in what it takes to change the higher education landscape. And the first lesson was that it's really, really important to find an ally, particularly when it came to the work on sexual misconduct. I was a known and outspoken survivor of sexual violence at university, And I got much farther in having another voice in the room who was backing me up and who was seen as impartial and had more privilege to speak than I did. In the second lesson that I learned is that it's really important to do your research. I mentioned already that I did some research on sexual misconduct and the research on cost of living. This tends to be received very well by senior members of leadership at university, themselves often being academics. The third thing I learned is that it's really important to be focused and to do one thing at a time. There can often be a tendency to want to spread yourself thin and try and fix as many things as you can. However, I've learned from experience that you can create much more impact by focusing on one issue at a time. The fourth thing I've learned is that time management is really important when it comes to advocacy in this space, since your role, your representative role, is often time limited. The Education Act of 1996 limits your term as a remunerated student officer to a maximum of 2 years. And if you're a part-time student representative, then you have until the end of your degree to implement the changes you want. So it's really important to keep in mind how much time you have left and what the best use of that time is. And finally, it's important to remember to feed back your wins to your community so that the people that you are trying to help with these changes can benefit from them in the most that they can. And so that's it for me in terms of my advice and experiences in advocating for change in the higher education sector. I'll ask Amelia to share my email if any of you want to connect from here on out.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I love hearing about your experiences and the amazing work that you've done at Imperial and beyond. And I think it's really useful for us to sort of understand better how that university system works and how we might want to engage with those systems ourselves to bring about change. And I think there's lots of questions coming in, so we will definitely come to you with questions. But for now, I would like to introduce Lucy Neat-Ward, who is another DLM member who is going to be talking to us about her experiences of bringing about change and particularly of working with sort of the decision makers at a university level. So I just want to check if are you there, Lucy?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. I will just share your screen, my screen. So please let me know. Can you see the slides?
Yep, I think they've come up.
And then if I put it in slideshow mode. Can you see them now?
Yes, I can see them. Hope everyone else can.
Are they in the not in the background display? They're in the main display.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I will put myself on mute.
Okay, well, thank you, Amelia. My name is Lucy May Neat-Ward. My pronouns are she, her. A quick visual description. I am a white cisgender woman with dark red hair with a fringe, blue eyes, glasses, and I am wearing a stone-coloured top sat in front of my kitchen counters. So I'm also a disabled academic and EDI advocate in UK higher education. I have severe EDS and also a rare neurological condition, so I'm a wheelchair user. In addition to my day job, I lead Access Salford, which is the Disability, Chronic Illness and Neurodivergent Colleague Network at the University of Salford, and we push for inclusive policy through an intersectional. Next slide, please, Amelia. Brilliant. So today I'm here to talk to you about grassroots advocacy in a university or an organisation. So I'll be using our example of Access Salford for that. We'll also be looking at senior leadership structures in UK higher education, and finally some tips for engaging with senior leaders. from a grassroots perspective. Next slide, please, Amelia. Brilliant. So what do we mean by grassroots advocacy? So grassroots is from the bottom up rather than top down. So it's ordinary people, ordinary workers within the organisation coming together and working to create change. So an example of this in the university system are colleague networks, advocacy groups, student societies, and student unions. So these groups give a voice to students and colleagues. They help recruit allies, and they represent the different perspectives of the colleagues within that to the organisation and to senior leaders in particular. Next slide, please, Amelia. So in this respect, I want to talk to you about Access Salford. So as I mentioned earlier, it's our disability, chronic illness and neurodivergent colleague network at the University of Salford. So we work with all colleagues, so both academics and people from the professional services, so things like comms, HR, finance, the support teams within schools, all sorts of different colleagues. So it's really about understanding their different perspectives and ensuring that we represent them as, whilst colleagues do have certain shared concerns, such as the reasonable adjustment passport was one of them. Academic and professional services colleagues do naturally have some different concerns. So when we came to creating the leadership structure for Access Salford, we wanted to make sure that we represented as many different perspectives as possible, both in terms of disabilities and in terms of people's job roles. So a big part of what we do is working around inclusive policies at Salford. So the one I mentioned previously was the reasonable adjustment passport. Colleagues in particular wanted that to be more inclusive for a variety of different disabilities and conditions. So it was listening to colleagues' concerns and also working collaboratively with them and consulting them at key points in the process. I think there's a common saying in the disability rights movement of nothing about us without us, and that's certainly the approach that we take. At Access Salford, we're very keen to engage with our colleagues and consult our colleagues on anything key or major which is going to impact on their experience as disabled colleagues at the University of Salford. Another part of what we do is we host community connect sessions to provide a supportive and judgment-free space for colleagues. This is something that we've particularly launched this year, as we found that it was something that colleagues had really wanted, that community spirit, which is key to kind of grassroots advocacy work. And finally, we work with senior leaders in the Disability Equity Committee at the university. So it's ensuring that we have shared objectives and that we are understanding institutional strategy and priorities and making sure that there is a clear shared agenda between ourselves and the senior leadership of the university. Next slide, please, Amelia. So some key tips for grassroots advocacy. The first one is build a supportive team. You do not have to advocate alone. For a long time, it was just myself and my co-chair running Access Salford, and I think we often don't talk about the burnout that can come with constantly advocating. So what we did in the last year is we went out and we've recruited leads for different positions and different disability subgroups, so that one, we have better representation in the sort of committee of Access Salford, and also so that they're there to help share all of the tasks that come with advocacy, and it helps to look after everyone's well-being. I'd say listen to the colleagues that you're representing and seek their views. I think oftentimes people just want to be heard, and that's a really important thing when you're doing any kind of advocacy and representing groups of people. So make sure that you are being representative of the different perspectives in the group that you are representing. I'd say don't be afraid to speak up and raise issues with senior leaders. Senior leaders are people just like us, and they have shared interests and shared objectives. And if there's something that you feel passionately about, or that is an issue, or that you think needs bringing to their attention, then definitely speak up. There's change can't happen if we remain silent. And finally, be open to feedback from colleagues and senior leaders and use this to grow. Myself and my co-chair know that we're not always going to get everything right. And I think listening to that feedback from the people you're representing is really key. Next slide, Amelia, please. So just a quick one to help understand university leadership structures. When I was at university, probably to my shame to admit, I didn't really understand the leadership of how universities work, and that's something that I've come to learn quite acutely in my day job and in running Access Salford. So at the top, you have the Vice-Chancellor, who is responsible for the overall direction of the university. Getting time with Vice-Chancellors can be incredibly difficult. Their diaries are incredibly busy, which is why I've highlighted the next couple of layers down. So the Deputy Vice-Chancellor and the Deputy Chief Executive Officer level, again, they are very much involved in the strategic running of the university, as are the Pro-Vice-Chancellors for things like education, research and EDI. But often these people are ones who are allies to different marginalised groups. They'll sit on different equity committees. So, for example, at Salford, our Deputy Chief Executive Officer sits on the Disability Equity Group, and they're key players in the university's overall strategic direction. So these are the people who it can be good to approach and work with. And below that, you also have Associate Pro-Vice-Chancellors who can also be useful depending on their specific role in the university. Next slide, please, Amelia. I think we're nearly there. So some key tips for working with senior leaders. Senior leaders are, as I've said before, incredibly busy people, but you can get time with them, but it's important to use the time that you have with them to the best advantage. So I would say understand your university's strategy or your organisation's strategy and their strategic priorities. You can often find the latest version of your university strategy document on their website. So I would read it carefully, take notes, and try to tie in your objectives with that strategic vision. Have a basic understanding of key issues facing UK higher education today, or the sector in which you're working. So, for example, it helps to understand the greater context in which your organisation is running. So, for example, for UK higher education, student mental health concerns are a key priority at the moment, as is digital transformation and political pressures. Be concise and plan ahead. So if you have key documents that you would like your senior leader to read or review ahead of your meeting, make sure that you send those in plenty of time. I know it sounds like a simple point, but with their busy diaries, it can help to have that in advance so that they can dedicate time to reading and digesting that. And finally, despite their position, senior leaders are just people with the same motivations and objectives as the rest of us. So remember, they're just another person with the same interests as you, and find these common points of interest to build your working relationship. Next slide, Amelia. And that's it from me. So please feel free to ask any questions, or you can reach me at my email there. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you so much. Yeah, as always, I think it's been a really thorough session today. Hearing from you, Natalie and Cara. I think it's really great to sort of understand the broader picture of things, but also some really practical tips there, some really nitty-gritty things about like sending the things in enough time and aspects like that, which I really appreciate. I'm aware we're running out of time basically. So if everyone is happy for us to run over a little bit, I know that from an access point of view, we have our DLN session next, so I'm hoping that will be fine because we're all booked till past. But I just want to check, Cara, are you okay to stay on for a little bit longer?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. So we've had loads of questions coming in, so I'm just trying to think how best to sort of group them. I think perhaps a question that particularly has been asked for you, Cara, but I'm sure Natalie and Lucy, you have your perspectives as well, is kind of how to balance this wanting to bring about change and doing all this great work, but balancing that with your own rest and recovery. And particularly, I think, Cara, we've had some questions about how to balance that with a progressive condition and sort of how to manage that.
It's a great and important question. And these are the tricks I use. And I'm very candid about my tricks, and I'm not ashamed of them. Again, every time I have an ableist moment where I'm feeling insecure or imposter syndrome, I think of Judy Heumann. I think of others in the community and how they also set boundaries. So one is sleep. Sleep is very important for my physical recovery. I'm also 48 years old and perimenopausal. So if I don't get 7 to 8, 9 would be delicious hours of sleep every night, I don't function well. And it's very hard when I travel, and I'm jet lagged now, just coming back from Germany. Also eating healthy. I do food prep throughout the week. My personal assistant comes in the morning. She'll be doing some carrot shaving for me today. So I make sure I have a healthy salad this afternoon with lots of protein. Having a degenerative muscle disease, I'm aware of, I've done the research to learn what foods are going to aggravate my body. So inflammatory foods versus foods that are not going to give me energy and not weigh me down. So I eat a lot of protein, vegetables, fruits. I love to cook, so that helps a lot. But also saying no, not chasing that spotlight. I have multiple invitations to go all over the world to feature my film. One, people don't want to pay me. I'm sorry, I'm not doing things for free, unless it's an organization that I'm very passionate about, but understanding I need to make a living, and that's how I'm making a living. But also, could something be done virtually? Is the flight and that going to be so challenging for just a quick, 2-hour event that I balance what is the pros and cons and what is coming out of this event. So being able to say no politely and confidently is really important for yourself. And as mentioned, that if I recognize in a moment that I'm suffering, I will then realize that I need to figure something out, whether that's asking for more help, get more sleep, say no to something, maybe eat. I get hangry a lot. I've got a bowl of pears right here in front of me. That's my advice for the balance. And if you're not okay, don't say you are. It's okay to say you're not okay.
Yeah, I think sleep is it's an elusive thing, isn't it? Well, thank you for joining us. I know it's really early there, so you probably had less sleep last night. Natalie, can I bring you in on that question? And I think there was particularly a question about kind of dealing with the intersectionality of your experiences, kind of how you balance that alongside taking care of yourself and bringing about change.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I absolutely agree with Cara that balance is key. And that's a lesson that I'm having to constantly learn and relearn over and over and over again. Alongside the things that I've already mentioned, I have suspected ADHD, which has had me trapped in a kind of overextension burnout cycle over and over and over again. And I've learned that slowing down and kind of living at a marathon pace rather than a sprinting pace has been really helpful. And one of the main things to help with that is keeping in touch with the things outside of work and advocacy that keep me sane. So things like spending time with friends. I'm also a long distance runner, and that's the one thing that makes my mind fully quiet. For those 2 hours that I'm running, I feel at peace. And I've noticed that as soon as that stops, then things get bad again. So yeah, maintaining balance is really, really important. And I think when it comes to dealing with trauma as well. I worked with a campaign group called ICS2. I think my friend, who's the founder, is in this chat. So hello, Nan. She developed a traffic light system that we used to communicate with each other, as many of our members had those comorbid trauma and disabilities. So green, amber, red was used to indicate how much energy and effort you were able to put into campaigning work at any given time. And I think that's helped quite a few of us to feel more able to communicate our needs.
That's really interesting. Thank you. If your friend is able to share more in the chat, that would be wonderful. And I think we've also got Meta on the call, who works with Disabled Students UK, and I know that they do amazing stuff as well to kind of make sure everyone can engage with activism on their own terms. Lucy, can I bring you in on that question? And I guess kind of from your perspective, maybe bringing in particularly how you balance it with it being, you've got your professional job and then you also do this on the side, and kind of how you balance the two when they maybe are in the same sphere, but different you're not being paid to do all of it. So how you kind of balance that?
Yeah, I'd say my passion gets me quite far. Obviously, as someone with a disability, disability rights, and particularly within the workplace, is something that I'm very passionate about, given I've not always had the most supportive experiences. But one of the things that as network co-chairs at Salford that we've been particularly, I guess, vocal on in the last year or not is almost trying to professionalize that network role, in a sense of getting it recognized on our professional development, and also having a sort of workload allocation given over to that network chair. So an expected number of hours that we can work on that, and getting line managers on board with that as well, and helping them to understand the importance of these network positions for EDI at Salford, as we have a fantastic EDI team, but without the networks, they've been key behind some of the really, they've been instrumental behind particular events at Salford, particular policies, all sorts of different things. So we've really tried to get that role recognised more at the university, to protect the welfare of the network chairs as well, because it, as I mentioned in my talk, it can be draining, particularly as well when you're managing a disability on top of that, and that's also part of the reason why usually there is one chair of the network, but we were particularly vocal about having two chairs, as I honestly couldn't do it without my co-chair. She is amazing. And when I'm struggling with my disability, or perhaps when I'm not well, she will pick things up and vice versa. So it is very much teamwork, and we are both there to look out for each other's welfare as well. So having that team has again been really instrumental to balancing that. And I think that's the thing, is sometimes it can feel like the world is on your shoulders and you having to advocate and fight so hard for all these things. But there are people out there who will stand by you. It's sometimes just a matter of finding those people. And although that can be difficult, building that team will help your welfare so much.
Absolutely, thank you. And I hope that as a network, we can be that community for each other. A lot of the members of the Disabled Leaders Network and beyond, but it is so important. I guess kind of bouncing off that, Cara, I wondered if I could bring you in with a question about kind of how to deal with how to get that buy-in from people who maybe don't share our values and views, and how to kind of deal with the negativity and yeah, people who just aren't as engaged on these issues, how we make them care, basically.
You're not always going to make people care, but what you can do is educate them so that, it takes a lot to change someone's behavior. And you have to change their attitude. And in order to change their attitude, you need to educate them. So what I will often do, and someone asked the question about like working at the UN because it's more open, not necessarily, it's quite discriminatory. The difference is that there are protection policies there, and know your rights. Angelina Jolie, who I love, has a tattoo that says know your rights. Maybe I should get a tattoo, but I have one, but maybe anyways, know your rights. Know your rights in the organization or at your university or the organization you work for. Understand what is the protection policy of not only of the organization, but of the city that you live in or the town. Know the federal rights and the federal legislation and hold on to it. I don't care if someone doesn't like what I'm advocating for. I don't care if they don't see eye to eye. That's fine. I'm okay to disagree, but I know what my rights are for myself and for my community, and I will demand them until we have them. Now, I have a thick skin, so my assistant often will say, you should just cry. And I often don't have the luxury to do so. But I then have to take a moment and find that balance, because when I'm angry and when I'm hurt, I know that that's actually hurting my body physically. It's actually increasing the progression of my disease. So I, in a quiet space, when I feel it's appropriate, I might go cry in the shower. I might go have a nap. I might go, do something. I'm very careful to stay away from harmful things. I never drink alcohol when I'm upset. I don't consume other things. I don't necessarily try to numb my feelings and my nerves. I work through the emotions. Therapy is fantastic. Professional therapy is important, and also finding your people and being able to share with people who won't judge you. That is really important, I think, for us when we're dealing with people who aren't going to agree with what we're doing, who aren't going to care about what's important to us, and might never, ever actually be on board, even when those rights and policies are in place. Thank you.
That's a very stirring message for us. Thank you. I think we need to probably be very quick, but can I bring Natalie, can I bring you in on that question? And maybe you could just mention a little bit about the research kind of side of things, how that really, you go about that to really get that buy-in at a university level.
Sorry, could you rephrase it, please? I was just looking at the Q&As.
Sorry, I know you mentioned about you carried out research to really support your campaigns, and maybe if you could just touch on how that can be used, particularly at a university level, to get that buy-in from the top.
Yeah, so I think what I found was I ended up bringing in a lot of the skills that I learned as a STEM student in my research, and it became much more refined actually when I went on to study behavioral science in my master's. So the typical first step is to identify a good research question. What question is it actually that you're looking to address? or what point is it that you're actually trying to investigate, and trying to approach it from the perspective of an impartial researcher, even though you can't fully be impartial yourself being a campaigner who's advocating for change. At least trying to present it in that way makes it more credible. So avoiding things like leading questions and surveys and things along that nature will help you come across in a more credible way. And yeah, so data analysis, having someone who's good with numbers on your team really helps. Having someone who's in social sciences help to design your study, design it like it's a study is also really helpful. So yeah, so my advice is approach it as if you were an academic. I don't know if that answers your question.
Definitely, yes. Thank you so much. And Lucy, can I bring you in just quickly on that in terms of building that community? I guess is something you've worked really hard to do, and finding your allies, and maybe some advice for just how to be a good ally. Would you have a bit of that you want to answer?
Brilliant. So yeah, community is particularly, I guess, important, especially when you're building a grassroots movement like a colleague network or student society. Part of that is using all of the possible avenues that you can think of to reach people. So, for example, in my work at University of Salford, I'm actually an executive assistant. So one of the things that we did when we were trying to relaunch Access Salford is we asked all the PAs that we knew to put out an advert across the entire university to all their distribution lists, and to build the community that way. I guess it's also as well through events and using particularly the comms networks that are available within your organisation. So, for example, at Salford, we have a staff hub. So we worked with the comms team to make sure that things were getting advertised and spotlighted on the hub. That worked really well to reach out to people. So that's sort of practical side of, I guess, building a community, is using the networks and the avenues available to you to contact people and reach your audience. The other side of community building is the values that you set within that community. So we've always been very adamant that when people come to an Access Salford event and come to our spaces, it is a confidential, judgment-free, safe space for people to connect with other members of the Access Salford network. So sometimes we have closed sessions just for people with disabilities, but we also run allyship sessions as well, where we mix the two communities, as we found sometimes people wanted to discuss certain issues that were important or particularly affected people with disabilities themselves. And we still wanted to discuss those issues with allies and help educate them. But it was finding the right space in which to do that. And we needed spaces in which colleagues felt safe to share. And, we respected that, and created different spaces for different groups to engage with the network as and how they wanted to. And we do also run whole network events where we bring everyone together. For example, we've got an online conference coming up that will bring everyone together, allies, people with disabilities, senior leaders, everyone is invited to that session. And again, it's building that sense of community.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and to our access providers for supporting us today. But thank you so much, Cara, Lucy and Natalie. I'm sorry we've run over time. I think there's so many questions. We could just keep going, but I don't want to keep you all. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise, and we will look through the questions that have been submitted, and maybe there's something we can do to kind of address those in future. Not sure what format that will take, but maybe there's something we can do. And I can see like Cara said, feel free to connect on LinkedIn, and I think I'll share all resources after this call and emails and things like that. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Our next session will be sometime in June, to do with getting into policy work as a disabled person. So I would recommend that. Keep an eye on your emails, and we'll send you details once that is booked in. If you're in the Disabled Leaders Network, you can come over to our discussion session, where you should have the link now in your emails. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and I will be in touch via email, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.